Hi friends, this is Yoga Light. Today we are exploring the idea of an inner being as part of a broad overview of the physical practices of yoga. The idea of going inwards has three intertwined descriptions. The first is the spirit system, which works with the silent witness and inner flow. The second is the subliminal consciousness with an idea of commerce, and the third is the soul. As we do yoga and become awake, we are aware that there is something more, that we are more than what we appear. We can divide the being into layers, the koshas or sheaths. These descend from a bliss sheath to the wisdom sheath, further to mind, animating energy, and the physical part of our existence. If we look at our experience of self, we can say that we think in our heads, feel with our hearts, and have a physical body with varying degrees of energy to carry out our lives. Most yogic practice aims to create a space for a silent witness to discover our true self. We observe our inner flow of the mind, stepping back to control our thoughts and making changes to our living instrument of being. Further practice adds subtlety and explores the interaction between the various layers. We find that the breath can be used to calm the mind and relax the body, or that what we do physically affects our consciousness, that our emotions and movements of the mind interact with the physical aspect. When we are angry, there are physical consequences. Our thoughts can both lead and follow our emotions, and our bodies react accordingly. Or we can still the body in poses that affect the mind. Movement adds another way of exploring, and we also become aware of subtle energy from the nervous system to the flow of prana and the centers of consciousness and the chakras. However, at first, and for most of us, for a long time, this awareness is in terms of the surface personality, our sense of self as we are in the world. We have a notion of a greater part of ourselves or a deeper part, and we see that over time we are changed and occasionally experience extraordinary things, from spiritual movements of bliss, great peacefulness, or occult experiences such as foreknowledge, talking to the dead, visionary understanding, or out-of-body experiences. Another aspect is the flow of experience in our lives, which shows us that we are connected to events via what we focus on in our minds and hearts. Also, there seems to be a secret intelligence or master that helps arrange events, protects us, or gives us lessons, leading us towards our goal. Sometimes it arranges opportunities using seemingly chance encounters that, in hindsight, were developed so that we were ready and able to recognize and benefit from these flows. We also have a sense of a personal or impersonal divine form from our own nature and beliefs. These are often reduced back to the claim of our mental ego, and we reason that it is our outlook that sees these things and makes them what they are rather than being a flow of something greater. But over time, it becomes more apparent that we lack that kind of control over events and our own faculties. All of these things point to a greater existence. We can say that our self-concept and sense of identity are representations of this greater being, but the representation and symbols are not obvious or complete, and we grasp at their meaning because we don't see all the vastness behind them that they truly represent. This veil between our greater existence is a gulf that needs to be overcome and bridged. As we look at ourselves in the world, we find that much of what we do and who we are is the result of our conditioning and habits. We are full of desires and impulses, subconscious memories arising and influencing the present perceptions and actions. We are influenced by the state of the world we live in and pick up influences from the people around us. As we become more conscious, it becomes more apparent that we are often trapped in our habits of relationships and belong to systems as a role that we play. We are the good one, the black sheep, or the one who is able to express anger, or the dutiful one. These roles and habits are not easily undone, even when we recognize them and come to understand their nature. We are compelled to act within the narrow bounds of the small track given to us by our family experiences and the people around us, and we recreate them, identifying or projecting as we interact with people who support our roles. As we develop through self-observation, we gain insight into the subconscious, a collection of memories and experiences, patterns of association and action, some of them distorted randomly, incomplete, and vague. We also see that our moods and thoughts are being affected by our environment and the weather, the time of year, and we are open or closed based on the comfort level. We feel based on what other people feel and say. We think and repeat the thoughts given to us by our world. We can see that our world is, in part, imaginary, such as our conception of history or of how things work in the real world. We can become disillusioned when institutions are different than we expect. We have in our minds all sorts of images of celebrities or politicians that may have little relation to actual people. Yet our sense of self is just as imaginary. This amalgam of the superficial parts of the being and the conditions we live in changes, however, when we begin to have an awakening to higher consciousness, with intuitive insights or a deeper consciousness as we connect to feelings such as love and compassion. When we enter the silence of the mind, a deeper understanding has a chance to enter the mind and reveal itself. We sense something more and can begin to explore the inner regions. Sometimes we make this connection through dreaming as it goes beyond the psychological dreams that reveal part of the inner processes of our mind to the subliminal dreams that take us into experiences of the greater worlds behind the surface. Dreams can show us foreknowledge or exchanges between ourselves and other people and beings. They can reveal hidden influences that were previously unknown to our waking consciousness. Our waking consciousness can also experience more direct contact with the subliminal, from past memories welling up or subtle senses such as the aura or hearing thoughts in the atmosphere. Knowledge can come with elative feelings and subtle light. Yoga shifts from trying to correct our imperfections and bad habits, purifying our emotional life and pursuing the slow growth of psychological means, to aiming to be more open and receptive to the inner experience and contacting the transformative energies. Looking at the inward experience, we find that each layer of the being has, at its basis, the fundamental consciousness consisting of the true being complete with knowledge of all existence and connection to a transcendent beyond it. All levels also possess a force or will to express that being that is inseparable from the truth of itself. Finally, each layer of being also has the creative power to enjoy the expression of truth and the power of what it is. This being and force of consciousness with the bliss is an inseparable trinity. This is the origin of all that manifests as existence. An inseparable aspect of this is individualized, so it is simultaneously transcendent, universal, and individual. This individual aspect is expressed through the various planes that make up our human form. One way of describing the inner being comes from Sankhya and divides the world into two categories, nature and spirit. We can say from our living experience that there is a silent witness and an inner flow. The inner flow is whatever is happening. The silent witness is the awareness. In most physical yogas, the first step is to calm the inner flow. This may be done through posture or through breath. As we calm down and relax, then the silent witness arises, and we can turn the mind inward. This is part of the withdrawal of the senses. The practical effects are that we can begin to direct the mind, and that our awareness expands. Over time, we can witness at any level, feeling with the heart, listening to the thoughts, or paying attention to the sensations of the body. This initial self-awareness, though, can go deeper, and beneath or behind these sensations, there are other activities. We can sense vibrations, lights, and palpable forces exiting and entering us. We can feel that we have a field around us, as do others, and we exchange energies. We move beyond the physical senses and the perception of reality that we are conditioned to be in. This enters into the subliminal consciousness. Still deeper, we can sense that everything is connected and that the world is actually an aspect of the fundamental consciousness. This fundamental consciousness is one in manifestation and becomes manifest as things and processes. The essential consciousness can be thought of as energy, but it also has knowledge. This truth of what it is has the power to be what it is. One line of yoga is to use the power of concentration to know via identity. Knowledge by identity focuses on an object moving past the mere sensation and ideation to identity, or rather to become the object, as the underlying essential consciousness is the same. When one identifies, then one knows it as oneself and knows its past, its future, its possibilities, its relations, its processes and reactions. One can identify with anything that the mind frames, so it can be an object, physical or subtle, a person, a place, an institution, or an event. Usually this is accomplished via trance states while sitting in meditation. This can be used, for instance, on chakras, and it is as if one passes through a barrier and suddenly knows. The practice is not about the contents, but the ability to identify. The content just confirms as we improve the ability. The goal is to identify with the highest, the divine. One merges one's identity with the supreme. Few have the capacity to concentrate in this way. For instance, being able to sit perfectly still for 6 hours, and just having the life situation that allows for it is given only to a few. The consciousness is all things and essentially one. It contains all things, all possibilities within it. Hence, we can identify with any instance or process because we are an instance and process of the One. This is essentially the yoga of Patanjali as pursued. Most use Patanjali only loosely as an organizing tool. It serves as a guide to lay down a foundation of control over the surface personality, points out the main ways of development through observation and restrictions, the yamas and niyamas, but then sets out to give practice and results, the various powers, and finally measured descriptions of the states leading to liberation. The physical practices in that light are mostly for keeping the body still, facilitating the sitting posture, and keeping healthy in order to do the practice. This also tends to lend itself to the pursuit of the transcendent realization, where one dissolves the sense of self in a static transcendent, obtaining liberation. A second line of development emerges from the silent witness. Rather than the goal of being a sitting trance state, one observes and develops equanimity or equality, and is able to maintain this silent peace and calm. From this position, we can begin to develop our intuitive discrimination and recognition of qualities. We can know what things need to be rejective and what things can be active. We see the play of forces on the surface and in the depths, but recognize a true way of acting and being in the world that comes from the true spiritual foundation behind it, a foundation that has all the possibilities of manifestation contained within it. This is intertwined with the soul and the self. The soul is, in part, the divine that forms in nature and slowly evolves from lifetime to lifetime. The self is the unchanging part of the soul, the part that is also above. It is unchanging, infinite, and eternal, and already an aspect of the divine. It is not affected by all that happens in time and space. It is one. The self is yourself, and within all beings. The silent witness, as such, is not simply awareness, it is actually an aspect of the inner flow. The two appear separate but are actually one. The silent witness is the directing power of the inner flow. It can reject movements, return to silence, and approve actions. This is in line with the essential truth. Actions can flow in harmony with the original direction and lines of development set forth in the creation. In the play of forces, there is a mix of conflicting and harmonizing movements. The silent witness can recognize and approve qualities and movements that are in line with the truth of being. This is usually severely limited because of the action of the superficial consciousness, which not only obscures the witness but limits our inner flow to our conditioned habits and outward focus through the sense mind. Just as our physical bodies are formed out of a material universe, so are our thoughts and feelings formed out of the consciousness. We have all possible thoughts, but our form and superficial consciousness is dependent on our conditioning and limits our access, covering the deeper resources. The ego claims it is the source of our thoughts, that it is responsible for our actions, but we find ourselves divided, with different parts of our mind competing to satisfy wants and needs. We find that we have habits that we want to stop, yet we keep giving in, mindlessly repeating them. When we gain silence, we can stand in loud music and not be affected by the beat. It seems to press on our aura, but we can deny its entry. In the same way, we can also deny the superficial consciousness. Eventually, we realize even the material world is formed out of this consciousness. The original substance has the truth within it. all of the possibilities that can manifest. So it's through silence that this is allowed to come to the surface. For a long time, the surface consciousness, our sense of self, takes this truth as something of its own manufacture. But if we examine our thoughts, we can begin to see different influences and sources. As we examine the subliminal, we will begin to see that we are less centered in a sense of I and more a channel of movements from a universal nature. You are working to defeat individualizing superficial consciousness and its distortion. We do this by drawing from the universal truth. This puts the emphasis in practice on mental equanimity and an equality of experience that includes the heart. We remove personal preferences, habitual reactions, and expected perceptions. We want to become more open and receptive and expand in awareness so that the true qualities emerge. These movements have their own force. It is not just mental ideas or moralisms. One day, I was in my high school locker room, and some of us had just come out of the shower. There was an argument, and I had a showdown with this other kid as the others stood watching. Just as it was about to come to blows, this younger classman, who was quite small, came in and said, "It's hard to look tough in your underwear." We all burst out laughing. The whole situation was transformed, and the energy was released by the power of his joke. In physical practice, we start with relaxation and calmness. We relax the body, calm the heart, and focus the mind, removing the restlessness and distractions from unconscious habits. This is not devoid of knowledge of alignment or energy, but the focus is on getting to the quietness of mind and heart and becoming more peaceful. We set the conditions with the body and breath to support the silent witness and bring out the inner flow's quality. As we are familiar with the practice, we can use that time, aiming to be silent and aware. Normally at the end of a sequence, the aim is to relax as much as possible while remaining awake, yoga nidra. But we can also do this as we go to sleep, using our skills to relax the body, calm the emotions, and quiet the thoughts, and then we can let go into sleep. When we allow the silent witness to arise and recognize it, the silence develops in three fundamental ways. The first is that the silent witness remains unchanged while the inner flow continues. The second is the recognition of the qualities and virtues. The third is that the consciousness expands and the sense of self within it. There are levels or grades to the quietness. Part of it is concentration. This may involve formal sitting meditation at first, but some gain this from long periods of mental work where your brain gets tired and you discover a mental cessation. Others have the experience of listening. For instance, if you are with a birder who is seeking a rare bird and thinks he hears it in the distance, you freeze in place listening. But because you're not a birder, you don't have all of the intensity or expectation. You simply listen. Your mind quiets so you can focus. You have to discover the silence of the mind, the fabled space between the thoughts, and over time be able to return to and extend this. Eventually you discover that silence, the witness, is there even in action. You can hold the silence in the midst of a conversation. This is often the overlooked aspect of the occult experience of going out of the body during activity, such as having a conversation. The conversation continues even as the person is traveling and is still aware of the conversation going on. Who is having the conversation? One can even be driving a car and leave the body, and the car doesn't wreck. But you're not sleepwalking. You're still aware and intentional. This recognition changes your relation to your sense of self. At first, there is a rejection of the noise, the habitual movements, unwanted awareness, and general jumping about of the mind. As some measure of calmness occurs, then we can recognize the shifting range of quietness, partially dependent on concentration. We can sense the level and move towards stabilizing the quietness, just being present. At the peak level, we exist in a timeless, static, infinite of peace that makes the phenomenal world seem like an illusion. However, when the silent witness and the inner flow are held together, then we maintain that connection to the witness while seeing the infinite. It is not a void, but full of possibilities, not a darkness, but self-luminous. There is a difference between being a silent witness and merely being observant. As such, initially we need to recognize and value quietness. From mere sensual immediacy, for instance, being focused on the sensation of touching the steering wheel while driving, or being focused on the here and now of the senses, to a receptive state. In the receptive state, we see the source entering the mind. There is separation from the awareness and the senses, the thoughts and the feelings. We gain freedom. We can sense the changes in consciousness. The witness no longer needs an object, but can rest in awareness. We can focus inwardly or be aware as we are focused outwardly. We can be quiet behind events. And when we lose that state and become absorbed in the world, we can recognize that the right movements and good qualities are still there in the background. If we focus on deep breathing from the base of the lungs up, and the long, slow relaxation as the breath is released, with that little dynamic bit of smoothly completing the exhale, we can observe that the mind quiets, but also that there is a different feel and mood for the inhale and exhale. Different energies are involved. From this observant status, we can sense a quality, whether we are smooth, the change in our state of awareness. This is not just the sensation, there is subtle recognition. The primary qualities are the gunas, or three modes of nature, inertia and action, and then harmony, which combines those two. But there is an even more subtle recognition that this is not about a given action or object, but about being. As things enter the mind, we use the observer to reject the noise, and we can also allow for good qualities or right thoughts to emerge. The recognition of qualities and virtues is different from some sort of moral notion. It is not a mental ideal being put forth. The mental ideal is a representation. The qualities are recognized because they are in line with the truth. There is an inner, intuitive recognition of a true quality. The silent witness and inner flow happen on different levels, heart, thought, or body, so we can recognize the truth of something on the mental level and allow this to come through in terms of inspiration and through speech. If we are silent and receptive, we often come up with the right thing to say, not by reflection, but by emerging. There is a truth in the moment. Sometimes we can even recognize that we are saying something that is effective to a person and not be aware of why, though we are aware of the truth force in it. Truth is a power. Power is defined by the ability to do work. Virtues are effective, emotional perspectives. Gratitude is the most commonly practiced virtue, but sincerity, the ability to look inward and deeply while being vulnerable, is invaluable. I knew someone who asked me for advice. Her mother was in the hospital, and there was tension between them. She explained what her mother was like and how her and her mother's personality types were at odds. This was part of a long history. She wanted advice on how to talk to her mother. I picked up on her description of personality types. It was obvious she wasn't thinking of her mother, but of her thoughts about her mother's psychology. She was looking at the mental image of her mother, not the living person. So I told her to be sincere and that the quality of sincerity is usually reciprocated. If someone is genuinely sincere with you, you will also tend to respond with sincerity. When she went to see her mother, she was summoning her sincerity, and as she walked into the room, she immediately understood that her mother was scared and asked her, "Are you afraid?" She said yes, she was scared of dying. This is not a story of my good advice. The lesson for me was that I was receptive, and that was what the person was looking for and needed to become. The practice of being quiet, identifying with the silent witness, and having faith in the truth behind the surface allows these effective qualities, kindness, compassion, and love, to arise. It allows them to work within a situation just as humor can. You can create a space for the force of being to be freely expressed. The essential truth is not a mental truth or idea. It's the force of consequence, a force of change and process, just as a mantra has effects. When we look at virtues, these are effective qualities. Things like gratitude, sincerity, and kindness are qualities that we may recognize in ourselves and others. They can shift a situation as humor does. They can change the nature of the interaction with others and also awaken the energy in ourselves. These will often emerge as needed when we tend towards a quiet, receptive action. Our nature is capable of expressing these qualities, but our limited conditioning does not allow these to emerge, or they are altered and distorted by the ego, and they can become an act or an indulgence and rendered less effective or even inappropriate. When I was a kid, I went to my friend John's farm to play baseball in their yard. During the game, John's dad yelled out, "John, the cow is out of the barn!" This turned out to be their bull, which was quite dangerous. John dropped the bat and sprinted towards a rusty barbed wire fence, stuck his hand out, hit the wire, and flipped over the fence, running, never losing a step. My friend didn't do gymnastics or practice acrobatics. He was strong, but it was only at that moment that all of his intention was focused on helping his dad. That athletic feat was physical intuition. We are capable of many things, but our normal sense of self and subconscious cover this potential. Our immediate reaction is also that I did this, the ego lays claim, just as people will try to recast experiences in familiar terms, the weather balloon effect. When you try to share an experience such as an NDE, a near-death experience, there will be reactions from people. Some people will say you are lying. Others will reduce it to chemical effects on the optic nerves. But you can sense that some people are receptive, that they can hear you and actually share in the consciousness of this experience. This receptivity is essential, as you are aiming to be receptive to a divine influence. In the next video, we will go deeper into the subliminal, at exchanges between people in subtle worlds, and then look at the soul behind it. If you got something out of this video, please hit the like and subscribe. Till next time.